An untamable horse. A young autistic boy. Everyone believed it was impossible, until the unimaginable happened. What this boy does will challenge everything you thought you knew about courage and connection. Prepare for a story that will leave you speechless. The day the horse arrived at Willow Creek Rescue Ranch, the entire staff gathered by the paddock fence, curiosity written on their faces. He was unlike any horse they had ever seen, towering, with a sleek black coat that shimmered under the sunlight, and fiery eyes darting back and forth as if searching for an escape. His nostrils flared, and his hooves struck the ground with fierce defiance. This was Midnight, a horse whose reputation had arrived before him. "He's trouble," muttered one of the ranch hands. "A rancher tried breaking him last year. Didn't end well." Madeline, the ranch owner, crossed her arms and sighed. "We'll keep him separated for now. Give him time to adjust." Nearby, 10-year-old Jacob sat cross-legged on the grass, his headphones snug over his ears. The world around him was often overwhelming, but the ranch was his safe haven. Horses were his retreat, a place where words weren't needed and emotion spoke louder than anything else. Madeline approached Jacob with a gentle smile. "That's Midnight," she said, nodding toward the paddock. "He's a bit of a challenge." Jacob's eyes flickered toward the horse. He studied Midnight for a long moment, then lowered his gaze again, tapping a rhythmic beat on his knee. Madeline didn't push him. She had learned long ago that Jacob moved at his own pace. As the weeks passed, Midnight's fiery temperament proved to be more than the ranch staff had bargained for. He refused to be saddled, kicked at anyone who came near, and paced his paddock restlessly. Madeline was beginning to wonder if he could ever be tamed. One warm afternoon, Jacob wandered over to Midnight's paddock. He had seen the horse from afar, but never this close. Today, something drew him near. He leaned against the fence, his headphones dangling around his neck, and watched as Midnight stomped and snorted. The horse's energy was overwhelming, yet Jacob didn't flinch. For hours, he sat silently by the fence, observing every movement, every twitch of Midnight's muscles. When the horse grew still, Jacob began to hum, a soft, soothing melody that floated gently on the breeze. Midnight's ears flicked toward the sound. His muscles tensed slightly, but he didn't bolt. Instead, he watched Jacob with a guarded, wary curiosity. Madeline noticed the scene from a distance and frowned, unsure if she should intervene. She approached cautiously. "Jacob, sweetheart, he's not safe," she said gently. "He's not angry," Jacob replied, his voice barely louder than a whisper. "He's scared." Madeline blinked in surprise. It wasn't the first time Jacob had seemed to understand something about the horses that others couldn't. But this felt different, deeper. Before she could respond, Midnight let out a low snort and took a tentative step closer to the fence. Jacob didn't move. He just kept humming, his gaze locked with Midnight's. And for a moment, the fiery stallion seemed to soften, his wild energy yielding to a quiet curiosity. Later that evening, when Madeline recounted the moment to the other staff, they dismissed it as coincidence. "He's just a kid," one of them said. "Midnight's not gonna change because of a song." But Madeline wasn't so sure. She had seen something in that interaction, something she couldn't quite explain. As the sun dipped behind the rolling hills, Jacob returned to his usual spot near the paddock. Midnight stood at a distance, a shadow against the fading light. But as Jacob began humming once more, the horse took another step forward, closing the gap between them, one note at a time. The following days at Willow Creek Rescue Ranch unfolded like a delicate dance. Every afternoon, Jacob wandered to Midnight's paddock, sitting cross-legged on the same patch of grass, his headphones resting around his neck. He didn't bring treats. He didn't carry a rope. He never tried to touch Midnight. Instead, he simply sat, humming softly, letting his calming tune drift through the warm air. Midnight, once restless and volatile, began to change in subtle ways. He no longer charged at the fence when people approached. His pacing softened from a frantic trot to a slow, deliberate walk. The ranch hands noticed but shrugged it off. No one could quite explain it. Madeline, however, had her own theory. "It's Jacob," she told her assistant, Rachel, one afternoon as they watched from the barn. "Somehow, he's reaching midnight in a way none of us can." Rachel frowned. "But how? He barely interacts with him the way we do." Madeline smiled faintly, her voice filled with quiet conviction. "Maybe that's exactly the point." One breezy afternoon, Jacob returned to the paddock with a small sketchpad tucked under his arm. Drawing had always been his way of making sense of a world that often overwhelmed him. Midnight stood at a distance, ears flickering as Jacob's pencil moved across the page. Jacob would glance up now and then, studying the horse's lines, his muscles, his eyes, capturing them with delicate strokes. After an hour, something remarkable happened. Midnight took another cautious step toward the fence, dipping his head slightly as if inspecting the boy's work. Jacob, sensing the moment, turned the sketchpad around. It revealed a simple but heartfelt drawing, a horse, black as midnight, proud and untamed, just like him. For the first time, Jacob spoke directly to the stallion. "You're not angry," he said softly. "You just don't trust anyone yet." Madeline, standing by the barn doorway, overheard him, and felt a lump rise in her throat. Jacob wasn't just talking to Midnight. He was speaking from somewhere deep within himself. Later that week, Madeline approached Jacob with an idea. She knelt beside him while he sketched near the paddock, the late afternoon sun casting a warm glow over the ranch. "Would you like to help me with Midnight?" she asked gently. Jacob hesitated, his pencil pausing mid-stroke. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice quiet. "We can work with him together," Madeline explained. "Just simple things at first, like walking him around the paddock, helping him get used to a saddle." Jacob's brow furrowed in thought. "But, he doesn't like people," he whispered. Madeline smiled. "He likes you." That evening, under Madeline's careful guidance, Jacob entered Midnight's paddock for the first time. The boy's movements were slow and deliberate, mirroring the horse's cautious energy. Midnight flinched slightly as Jacob approached, but he didn't bolt. Instead, he lowered his head, his dark eyes watching Jacob intently. Jacob held out his hand, palm up, and began to hum, the soft melody that had become their unspoken bridge. The sound seemed to calm Midnight. Tentatively, the horse took a step forward. When Midnight's velvety nose brushed against Jacob's fingertips, the boy's face lit up, a smile so pure and radiant that it brought tears to Madeline's eyes. "That's it," she whispered. "Just let him come to you." For the next hour, Jacob walked slowly alongside Midnight, his hand resting lightly against the horse's neck. The stallion's usual tension seemed to melt away, his steps falling into rhythm with the boy's. By the time they returned to the gate, a small group of ranch hands had gathered, their faces a mix of astonishment and disbelief. Rachel shook her head, her voice filled with wonder. "I've never seen anything like it." Madeline helped Jacob back to his chair and knelt beside him. "You're doing something amazing, Jacob," she said softly. "You're showing Midnight that he can trust again." Jacob looked up at her, his voice steady but soft. "He's showing me too." That night, as Jacob lay in bed, his mind raced. Midnight had trusted him. But a nagging doubt gnawed at the edges of his excitement. What if he couldn't live up to everyone's expectations? What if, like Midnight, he wasn't ready to take the next step? The next morning, Willow Creek Rescue Ranch buzzed with excitement. Word of Jacob and Midnight's unlikely bond had spread quickly. Ranch hands who had once written the horse off as hopeless now watched in quiet amazement. For Madeline, it was a testament to the power of patience and connection. For Jacob, it was the first time he truly felt like he belonged. After breakfast, Jacob made his way to the paddock, his sketchpad tucked under his arm. Midnight was already waiting near the fence, his ears flicking forward the moment the boy appeared. Madeline watched from a distance, marveling at the change. The horse's once defensive posture had softened, a living symbol of transformation. "Morning, boy," Jacob said softly, his voice carrying warmth and familiarity. With Madeline's help, Jacob opened the gate and stepped inside. Midnight didn't flinch as the boy approached. And when Jacob placed a hand on the horse's neck, a ripple of warmth spread through both of them. Madeline entered the paddock carrying a soft leather halter and a saddle. "I was thinking we could try something new today," she said, her tone light. "No pressure, of course, just see how he feels about wearing a saddle." Jacob glanced at Midnight, then back at Madeline. "Okay," he said, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "But only if he's ready." Madeline handed Jacob the halter, guiding him step by step in how to slip it gently over Midnight's head. The horse stood still, his dark eyes locked on Jacob, trusting. When the halter was secure, Jacob gave Midnight a soft pat. "Good boy," he whispered. Madeline placed the saddle on the fence first, letting Midnight sniff it before draping it carefully over his back. The stallion shifted slightly, but he didn't resist. Jacob stayed close, humming the familiar melody that had become their shared language. For the next hour, Jacob and Madeline worked together, adjusting the saddle, walking Midnight around the paddock, offering calm encouragement. Every step felt monumental. By the time they finished, Midnight's movements were fluid, confident, a world away from the wild creature he had been. "You're a natural," Madeline said, smiling at Jacob. "He trusts you completely." Jacob beamed, but his smile faded when he noticed a small crowd of ranch hands gathered near the fence. Their faces showed a mix of curiosity and skepticism. "Don't worry about them," Madeline said gently. "This is about you and Midnight." That afternoon, Jacob sat sketching by the paddock while Midnight grazed nearby. He didn't notice one of the newer ranch hands, Adam, approaching until he heard the voice. "You know he's still wild, right?" Adam said. His tone wasn't cruel, but it carried an edge of doubt. One good scare, and he could snap. Jacob's grip on his pencil tightened. He didn't respond, but his shoulders tensed. Madeline, overhearing, stepped in firmly. "That's enough, Adam," she said. "Midnight has come farther in a week with Jacob than he ever did with anyone else." Adam shrugged. "I'm just saying. Wild horses don't change. And neither do people." Jacob stared at his sketchpad, the weight of Adam's words sinking in like stones. Madeline knelt beside him, her voice soft but steady. "Don't let anyone make you doubt yourself, Jacob. What you're doing with Midnight, it's real. And it's amazing." That evening, Jacob sat quietly in the barn beside Midnight's stall. The soft sounds of the ranch filled the night, the gentle creak of wood, the low nickers of horses settling in. Jacob reached out, threading his fingers through Midnight's thick mane. "I know what it's like," he whispered. "To feel like you don't fit anywhere." He smiled sadly. "But we're proving them wrong, aren't we?" Midnight nickered softly, his ears flicking toward Jacob's voice. The boy smiled, a quiet determination settling over him. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone else. Just to himself. And to Midnight. As the barn lights dimmed and the night deepened, Jacob made a silent promise. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The ranch was unusually quiet the next morning. The air hung heavy with the promise of rain. Jacob arrived at the paddock as usual, but the atmosphere felt different. Midnight paced nervously near the fence, his movements restless, his ears flicking back and forth, nostrils flaring as he sniffed the charged air. Madeline noticed immediately. "Storm's coming," she said, placing a hand gently on Jacob's shoulder. "Horses can sense it before we do. It's probably making him uneasy." Jacob frowned, his gaze locked on Midnight. "What do we do?" he asked quietly. Madeline smiled gently. "We stick to what we've been doing. Show him that he can trust us, no matter what." Jacob nodded, his determination outweighing his nerves. He opened the gate and stepped inside, Madeline close behind him. Midnight turned toward them, his dark eyes wary but not hostile. Jacob began to hum softly, his voice steady despite the growing tension in the air. They worked through simple exercises, walking Midnight around the paddock, the saddle loosely strapped to his back. The stallion seemed calmer with Jacob nearby, even with the storm looming. But halfway through their session, a sharp crack of thunder split the sky. Midnight reared slightly, his hooves striking the ground in panic. Jacob froze, his heart pounding in his chest. Madeline stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Easy, boy. It's okay." But Midnight's fear was contagious. He pulled against the lead rope, his eyes wide with terror. Jacob felt a pang of helplessness, but he refused to give up. Dropping the rope, he stepped forward, his hands outstretched. "It's okay, Midnight," he said, his voice trembling but brave. "You're not alone." The stallion hesitated, his breathing shallow and fast. For a terrifying moment, Jacob thought Midnight might bolt. But then, something shifted. Midnight's ears flicked toward Jacob. He lowered his head slightly, his body trembling but still. Madeline watched in awe as Jacob reached out and rested a hand on Midnight's neck. The boy's voice grew stronger as he hummed their familiar melody, letting the notes drift into the stormy air. Slowly, the tension began to melt from Midnight's body. "You did it," Madeline whispered, her voice thick with pride. But their relief was short-lived. A gust of wind blew across the ranch, rattling the barn doors and sending hay flying into the air. Midnight spooked violently, pulling sharply against the saddle strap. Before anyone could react, the saddle slid off his back, hitting the ground with a loud thud. The sudden noise sent Midnight into a frenzy. He reared again, his hooves flashing dangerously close to Jacob, who stumbled backward. Madeline rushed forward, pulling Jacob to safety just as Midnight bolted across the paddock. "Midnight!" Jacob cried, his voice breaking. He struggled against Madeline's hold, desperate to reach the frightened horse. "Jacob, stop," Madeline said firmly. "It's too dangerous." But Jacob's eyes were locked on Midnight, who was now pacing wildly at the far side of the paddock. "He needs me," Jacob said, his voice trembling. "I can calm him." Madeline hesitated, every instinct screamed to keep Jacob back. But she had seen the bond between boy and horse. Taking a deep breath, she loosened her grip. "Be careful," she said. "I'm right here if you need me." Jacob stepped forward, his heart pounding in his ears. Midnight's eyes were wild, his movements frantic, but Jacob didn't falter. He began to hum again, his voice cutting through the storm like a steady beacon. Midnight paused, his ears twitching toward the sound. Slowly, carefully, Jacob approached, his hands open and his movements deliberate. The stallion's breathing slowed. His muscles relaxed, just slightly, as Jacob drew closer. When Jacob finally reached him, he placed a hand on Midnight's neck and whispered. "It's okay. I'm here." Midnight lowered his head, pressing his muzzle against Jacob's chest. The boy smiled through tears as the storm raged around them. From a distance, Madeline watched, her heart swelling with pride and relief. Against the chaos of the storm, Jacob and Midnight had found something unbreakable. Trust born not from force, but from pure, unwavering connection. As the rain began to fall in gentle sheets, Jacob led Midnight back to the barn. The horse followed willingly, his trust in Jacob stronger than his fear. But as Madeline looked to the horizon, where dark clouds still loomed, she knew. This was only the beginning of the challenges they would face together. The morning after the storm, Willow Creek Rescue Ranch buzzed with renewed life. The rain had refreshed the pastures, and the air smelled crisp and clean, heavy with the scent of wet earth. Jacob sat by the paddock, sketchpad in hand, though his focus was entirely on Midnight. The horse stood tall and calm, his black coat gleaming under the morning sun, a stark contrast to the frantic, terrified animal of the night before. Madeline approached, her steps slow, her expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking, Jacob," she said as she knelt beside him. "Midnight trusts you in a way I've never seen before." She hesitated, then smiled. "Have you ever thought about riding him?" Jacob's eyes widened. "Riding him?" Madeline nodded. "It doesn't have to be today. But I think you two are ready, if you're willing to try. I'll be with you every step of the way." Jacob looked at Midnight, who stood nearby, watching him with a calm, steady gaze. The idea thrilled him, but it terrified him too. Midnight was powerful, strong enough to overwhelm even seasoned riders. Jacob knew that better than anyone. But then he remembered the night before. How Midnight had trusted him, even in the heart of a raging storm. Jacob took a deep breath, feeling a flicker of courage rise inside him. "Okay," he said finally, his voice steady. "Let's try." That afternoon, Madeline and Rachel set up the paddock carefully, making sure everything was safe and secure. Jacob wheeled himself to the fence, his heart hammering in his chest. Madeline approached with the saddle in hand. Midnight stood calmly, allowing her to place it on his back without flinching, a testament to the bond he and Jacob had forged. Jacob moved closer, his hands trembling slightly. Madeline knelt beside him, speaking gently. "We'll take it slow. Just let him feel your presence." With Madeline's help, Jacob was lifted carefully onto Midnight's back. The sensation was overwhelming, the height, the power he could feel beneath him. For a moment, Jacob froze, gripping the saddle tightly. "It's okay," Madeline said softly. "He's got you." Jacob took a deep breath. Slowly, his body relaxed. Midnight shifted slightly, but his movements were careful, deliberate, as if he knew how important this was. "Let's walk," Madeline said, holding the lead rope and guiding Midnight in a slow, steady circle. Jacob's heart raced at first, but as they moved, he began to adjust. He began to trust. After a few laps, Madeline paused. "Do you want to try guiding him yourself?" Jacob hesitated, then nodded. Madeline handed him the reins, her hands hovering nearby just in case. "Just like we practiced," she said. "Use gentle pressure." Jacob gave a soft tug, and to his amazement, Midnight responded immediately, turning just as Jacob had asked. A wide, unstoppable smile broke across Jacob's face. He was doing it. They were doing it. The ranch hands gathered by the fence, their skepticism melting into awe. Rachel wiped a tear from her eye. "I can't believe it," she whispered. "He's really doing it." Madeline stood back, pride swelling in her chest. "They both are," she said. As the sun began to set over the hills, Jacob and Midnight came to a stop in the center of the paddock. Jacob leaned forward, resting a hand on the horse's strong neck. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Midnight nickered softly, his ears flicking back, as if acknowledging the words. For Jacob, this moment was more than just a personal victory. It was proof that trust, patience, and courage could bridge even the widest gaps. That evening, as the barn settled into its usual nighttime hush, Madeline joined Jacob by Midnight's stall. "You were incredible today," she said warmly. "Both of you." Jacob looked up, his eyes serious but shining. "He's not just a horse," he said quietly. "He's my friend." Madeline smiled, her heart full. "And you're his." As the barn lights dimmed and the ranch settled into a peaceful quiet, Madeline's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her eyebrows lifting in surprise. It was a call from the organizer of a local equestrian showcase, a well-known event that celebrated extraordinary horse and rider partnerships. After a brief conversation, Madeline turned toward Jacob, her heart pounding with excitement. "Jacob," she said, kneeling beside him. "There's a showcase coming up next month. They want you and Midnight to perform." Jacob's eyes widened. Perform. In front of people? Madeline nodded, her voice steady. Yes, but it's not a competition. It's just a demonstration, you and Midnight showing what you've accomplished. No pressure. Jacob glanced toward Midnight's stall, where the horse stood calmly, his dark eyes watching them. The thought of performing in front of strangers twisted Jacob's stomach into knots. Crowds, noise, expectations, all the things that usually overwhelmed him. But when he looked into Midnight's steady gaze, he felt that quiet, unwavering trust, the bond they had built together. After a long pause, Jacob gave a small, determined nod. Okay, he said. We'll do it. The following weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Madeline and Rachel worked tirelessly to fine-tune Midnight's movements, ensuring he was ready for the environment of an arena. Jacob practiced every day, guiding Midnight through simple routines. Walking, turning, stopping, small jumps. They kept the tasks gentle and focused, always prioritizing the trust between them. Slowly, a routine came together, one that told the story of a boy and a horse who had found each other against all odds. The ranch buzzed with excitement. Even the skeptical ranch hands began offering encouragement and tips. Everyone wanted Jacob and Midnight to succeed. The day of the showcase arrived, crisp and clear. The ranch team loaded Midnight into the trailer, making sure he was comfortable and calm. Jacob sat quietly in the passenger seat beside Madeline, his headphones around his neck but unused. His fingers tapped nervously on his knees as they drove toward the arena. When they arrived, the sight took Jacob's breath away. The staging area bustled with activity, horses, riders, trainers, families, all moving in a whirlwind of excitement. Jacob's heart pounded. Doubt whispered at the edges of his mind. Madeline knelt beside him before they unloaded Midnight. You've got this, Jacob, she said, her voice calm and steady. Just focus on Midnight. No one else matters. Jacob nodded, taking a deep, steadying breath. As they led Midnight toward the arena entrance, the announcer's voice boomed through the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jacob and Midnight, a story of trust, courage, and the unbreakable bond between a boy and his horse. The arena fell silent as Jacob and Midnight entered. The sight was striking, the boy in his wheelchair, guiding the towering black stallion with quiet confidence. Jacob's hands trembled slightly as he held the reins, but Midnight moved with steady assurance, responding to every cue as if reading Jacob's mind. They began with simple movements, walking, turning, stopping on command. The crowd watched in rapt attention, captivated by the connection between boy and horse. Then came the jumps. They were low, set for safety, but still daunting. Jacob whispered under his breath. You can do this. We can do this. Midnight's ears flicked back at the sound of Jacob's voice, and together, they approached the first jump. With a graceful surge, Midnight cleared it effortlessly. The crowd erupted into applause, but Jacob barely heard it. His entire world was Midnight, the trust, the rhythm, the bond. Jump after jump, step after step, they moved together, a perfect harmony forged through patience, struggle, and love. When they finished their routine, the arena echoed with cheers and standing ovations. Jacob dismounted carefully with Madeline's help, his face flushed with pride. Midnight stood tall beside him, his black coat gleaming under the bright arena lights. A man approached them, admiration written across his face. That was incredible, he said. You've shown us something truly special today. Jacob rested his hand gently on Midnight's strong neck. It's not just me, he said quietly. Midnight made it possible. As they led Midnight back toward the trailer, Jacob felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. He had doubted himself so many times. But Midnight had never doubted him. Together, they had achieved something extraordinary, something no storm, no fear, no past doubts could ever erase. That night, back at the ranch, Jacob sat beside Midnight's stall, sketchpad in hand. He drew the moment they had shared, boy and horse, side by side, facing the world together. As the sun set behind the hills, Jacob whispered into the quiet barn. "We did it, boy. And this is just the beginning." In the days following the showcase, Willow Creek Rescue Ranch buzzed with pride. Visitors dropped by just to meet Jacob and Midnight, eager to witness the bond that had touched so many hearts. But for Jacob, the real reward wasn't the applause or the admiration. It was the quiet moments, sitting beside Midnight in the barn, sketching while the horse grazed nearby, feeling the deep, steady pulse of trust between them. It was the way Midnight would nicker softly whenever he saw Jacob approach. It was the knowledge that they had found something together, something few people ever find even once in their lives. One evening, as the sky blazed orange and pink with the setting sun, Madeline sat with Jacob outside the barn. "You know," she said, her voice gentle, "you've done something most people would have called impossible." Jacob smiled, his fingers tracing a soft pattern across the cover of his sketchpad. "I didn't do it alone," he said. "Midnight believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." Madeline wiped a tear from her eye, feeling the weight and beauty of his words. "You believed in each other," she said. "And that's what made the impossible happen." Jacob looked out across the fields, where Midnight grazed peacefully in the twilight. "I used to think," he said slowly, "that being different meant I didn't fit anywhere." He paused, the soft evening breeze ruffling his hair. "But maybe, being different is exactly what Midnight needed. And maybe it's exactly what the world needs too." Madeline nodded, pride and emotion filling her chest. "You're right, Jacob. And you're going to help a lot more people realize that." As the stars began to prick the darkening sky, Jacob made another quiet promise, not just to Midnight, but to himself. They would keep going. They would keep proving that trust and patience could change everything. That connection, real, fearless connection, could heal even the deepest wounds. And somewhere deep inside, Jacob knew. This wasn't the end of their journey. It was only the beginning.